Clarage, unbelievably excited to be having this sit down visit with you. We've been on a deep dive into connecting biophysics. And so Dr. Petra and I go back and forth on finding neat studies, and she just got blown away with, I want to say it was a presentation you did on green light that just, as we were trying to understand that world. So if you don't care, will you give us that just kind of brief intro on who you are and why?
Yeah, so I've pursued different directions of science all my life. In the 80s, I was radio astronomy. In the 90s, it was, we called it structural biology at the time, but I'm trying to understand how proteins do their job. And since nature always combines form with function, the idea was if we know the form, the shape, the form of proteins, can we understand how they do what they do? Because actually, we don't really we don't really understand how proteins do what they do. Like insulin has 40 main jobs that we know about, and it's just this little teeny, this little teeny protein. And then after that, it went back to astronomy, and it's then I ended up with the electric universe community, and then that really took a turn. Most of my research has been exploring electricity in a variety of forms, whether it's cosmological or medical, geological, etc.
How important do you think seemingly wildly opposed aspects of science and academia matter? How do they fit together?
The different like astronomy with
Fields?
medicine. Yeah, well, they certainly complement each other in my mind. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure how to directly comment on that, but it's not really. It's one universe, and the principles of the universe just keep expressing themselves in different places. And if I see something in a cell, or if I see something in a galaxy, it doesn't really, in my mind, I'm not saying, oh, that's astronomy, right? I don't have
It's
that
awesome.
kind of breakout in my mind.
Yeah. So
Petra, why
interesting.
are you so excited to have this conversation?
So when I first was introduced to Dr. Claridge's work, which was through the Rising Tide Foundation, when you gave a lecture, I think it was 2023, and it was called The Light of Life. And I was just so taken with it because you discuss amazing concepts that have been so on the forefront of our minds, of what we've been trying to connect the dots with. And when you said that you really thought we should have medical physicists, it was like, we need to talk to him.
Yeah.
So I think that was such a great line, and I think it's so important to have that aspect to medicine. And so I would love for you to talk about how you would view that, how we can use physicists in medicine.
Well, yeah. I guess, and maybe even more specifically than that, electric. Like we
Yes.
have, we all grew up in the world of biochemistry, and if you ask most trained doctors or biologists, they actually believe that life is chemical. Like that
Hmm.
that is the paradigm,
Yeah.
and anything else just doesn't even make it in. And yes, life has a chemical aspect to it, but life itself is not chemical. That's like I'm never sure. That's like comparing the composer to the violin player or something. I don't know. I'm not sure what the right metaphor is, but life is something entirely different than chemicals. It comes from a different place in the universe. It has different laws that pertain to it. So getting back to the question then about physicists, so you could just there's so many things about life that manifest electrically and maybe have chemicals as a not so prominent, but where the prominent force or the prominent action is electrical. And so electricity and light always go together, which is very cool, right? That they're always together. You can't separate the two of them. Anytime you have electricity, you have light. Uh, And so so we need more medicine that is exploring the electricity of life or the light of life. Either way, either way, it's going to be the same. Going to be the same.
What
Yeah,
I
you and
find really fascinating about that you've laid out is it's not necessarily new concepts either, right? Like you've broken down in one of your videos with Alexander Gurwitch in the onion root experiment, and then we have St. Georgie saying that proteins have some sort of a semiconductor or electrical structure, right? And then Robert O. Becker comes and takes that to a whole nother level, and you're tying that in as well. And I think that when we, Petra and I have came to this spot looking at cancer specifically, and then biophoton emissions and bio-delayed luminescence. And so when we look at what Fritz Popp and Roland Van Wyck have put out, all of this seems to come together. And I think that these are those conversations where you're going to help us be able to piece together some very important connections in all this. So why do you think that even with this really not being that new, we've not moved just the way that I feel like it should have moved with the excitement that it makes so much sense to us here in 2020?
yeah, wow, what a question. Uh, there are so many directions of human life where we get stuck for decades or centuries, and why does that happen? I don't know. That's a pretty deep question. I'm not sure why it happens. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. What do you think? I have no idea why we'd be stuck. We are stuck. We're always stuck. Yeah,
Well, we are stuck, and I think, try to keep this from going negative, but I think that when we have somebody like Robert O. Becker getting canceled, that's detrimental to the movement. It's
you
detrimental
bet.
to learning and applying, and that seems to be the case over and over and over again in science. When you step outside of that box, out of the paradigm, you're literally killed or canceled. And so I don't understand it, and I don't understand how. I do. I want to jump ahead a little bit. When we see the work of like Michael Levin, right? And we see how this morphogenesis takes place with an electromagnetic stimulus, right? That that is not really even new. But if and there seems to be no credit given to Becker. And then when you have somebody like Andrew Marino coming out with his book Going Somewhere, everybody should read that book. We have where the funding goes, the movements go in experiments in science, but that direction's dictated by the funding and who's funding, and that's not always the right direction. So I am very perplexed by Levin's lab, just to be completely honest, because it doesn't make sense to me that we're not building the layers appropriately, just like you did, right? Gurwitch, St. Georgie, Becker, Pop, right? There's layers there. They've been around. I don't understand kind of some of the things that are coming out.
I mean, don't understand why why he's not crediting the people before, or don't understand the results.
No, I understand the results. I just don't understand the why we're not crediting and we're building
Yeah,
on science in a complementary way.
exactly. Yeah, and I actually don't know in Levin's case whether he doesn't know about, for example, Becker. I find that a little hard to believe that he wouldn't know about Becker's research. And if he does know, right, why is he not? Why is he not lauding the man, congratulating him and everything? I do not know. I do not. You got to have
Curious.
Levin on here.
Yeah, that would be good. I'm curious if you've run up into any kind of situations where you have been asked to kind of calm down in certain areas that you talk about and write about and discuss. Has that happened to you?
Well, in strange ways, back before I switched to Substack, um, my blogs I would get censored for this, just what seemed to me strange reasons. So I think I always just attributed it to algorithms gone crazy or something. Uh, I remember I published an essay on the nature of time, dimensions of time, and how it shows up in some of St. Paul's letters. and boom, I got the notice, right? You've been whatever, you're violating community guidelines or whatever it was. And I was just like, this is insane. So I switched over to Substack. But in terms of like a more public forum, no, I think it's really just you run into the people who make fun of you or say that you're not a serious scientist or whatever, just because they can't explain what I'm describing or something. Yeah, and so that's still very strong. Yeah, if I gave a talk at the Harvard Smithsonian Astrophysics Center a few years ago, and generally speaking, everybody was very happy to have me talk. It was really good. But then afterwards, there was just these groups of I assume professors, I don't actually know, who just couldn't stand it. They were really trying to tear me down, and it was like, oh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Interesting. Um, let's talk about time, because actually, Logan had just done a really, really interesting podcast with Dr. Jack Kruse about time and time stamping. And I'm curious what your thesis was of that paper that you talked about time.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've been exploring different ideas of time for a while, quite a while. Um, uh, and really, what it is going back to older ideas about time.
Mm-hmm.
I think currently we are at a low point in our understanding of time. If you look back over history, we're at a pretty low point. And so a few aspects that I think need to be recovered, otherwise science will continue to be stuck, is what one could say is other dimensions of time. At least that's how we would put it in our language. But just like the concept of eternity, before, I don't know when, before 1400 or something, roughly around there, eternity did not mean a very long time. That's not what it meant, But these days, for the several centuries now, we think eternity is a line of time that goes on forever, and that's not what was ever meant by it. Eternity has attributes where all now moments, like this is a now, here's another now, this is another now, all now moments exist all together, and they're all just as present as the one that I'm aware of right now. And so that, I mean, knowing that, or pursuing that, knowing that, thinking about that, I know for me, it opens up more of it opens up a new way to understand my own life. That 12-year-old boy is still there, standing in the driveway, just as the older man is just here sitting and something about our consciousness, or I should say our level of consciousness, really makes us believe that the past is gone, which is how, as a scientist, that's an absurdity. Oh, the past is gone. Oh, really? Where did it go? It's like, you know, uh, the entire universe comes into existence and then disappears every moment. I don't think so. I don't think that doesn't make much sense. Um, yeah, but in terms of the science, it's not really clear to me how it penetrates science. Except quantum mechanics is pretty good. Quantum mechanics has the idea. So if we say that the line of my time existing all at once is a dimension, a reality of time. There's also the idea of possibilities, that different possibilities exist. And quantum mechanics, when you try to calculate, where will the electron land, or what kind of energy levels will the mitochondria wall have, or whatever, you try to solve for energy levels or for trajectories, you have to add up all possible paths. You have to add up all possible outcomes in order to get what we see. And this is an attribute I think that quantum helped with a lot, is to start to really appreciate that what I see about something is simply what I see about it. It's not the thing in and of itself. I'm not seeing the reality of it. My perceptive apparatus is doing an enormous amount of filtering or modifying, the incoming whatever's coming in. And so I experience the metal as solid. Is the metal really solid? I don't know. How do you even answer that question? You can shoot electrons through it. That's not very solid, right? We're told there's more empty space, right, between the atoms than the, so but at the same time, it is how I experience it, and I think that part of what I'm experiencing is all possible lives for the electrons or the atoms in here. And when I experience all possible lives of these little bits in here, I render that as solid. I render it as a mass that's solid, that's shiny, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you can bounce that up that whatever's above us. So say, how does the sun see us? Well, the sun doesn't see us like this, that's for sure. I mean, we live for 80 years. What is 80 years to the sun? It's just like gone, right? So the sun, though, if we take the temporal dimensional shift, the sun would see, say, all of my possible lives, something like that, or it would see all of humanity as a thing, like not made up of different people, right? But as a single thing. What is how the sun would see humanity? See, these are questions. Which I don't know. It's not. Like I say, in quantum mechanics, what was great about it is they worked out a way to tie it with experiment. Like you can do experiments to show that what we are seeing is all possible trajectories of an electron. I don't know how we run the experiment the other way. How could we experiment to know how the sun experiences us? I don't know. That one, I'm not sure.
One thing I find
There's that little
absolutely
time spiel.
fascinating, the time spiel, it is even on time, or every single aspect. There are the layers. It's like you coming into here from the astrophysicist down to medicine within a submolecular view, right, and everything in between. To me, it reminds me of the quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And it seems like through every layer there's similar principles.
Exactly.
And one that I'm just fascinated by, but I'm not sure that I can wrap my mind around it yet, is the idea of plasma. And then because when you look at it on a universal or a galaxy type scale versus what's going on a femto or pico scale, I think that there's some similar things going on there, kind of that we're not repeating but rhyming. And so when I'm going to tie this back into light, and I want to understand the bioelectricity from your perspective. When you come in with this light input that we all have to have, whether that's the external or that's through a biophotonic emission like mitochondria, we know through Nick Lane's work that the inner mitochondrial membrane produces a 30 million volt charge, right? But this goes
Amazing.
back to that scale that we're talking about, right? That's different from that universal to down to inner mitochondrial membrane. When this happens, right, you have to mitigate that, or you electrocute yourself, right? Like that's what would happen in a dehydrated state. And so we know that this then is reduced down through metabolic water. That is the insulator that the mitochondria actually also produces, along with light. And so my point is, in in physics, when we are making plasma, right, it is an extreme charge. It's an ionization, right? It's this fourth phase of material. I think that we have that going on in the cell. I think that this is going on. It's something that I refer to as logos plasma, right? It's a living plasma that's generated, and I think it's connected to the microtubules, like possibly even to where microtubules are plasma. But how do we control plasma? In physics, this is where magnetism comes in, right? You have to have magnets that control it. You have a container, you have time, you have energy that go. So what are your thoughts around that? Because I think that with that rhyming analogy, we can piece this together a lot better than I've ever seen anyone ever even attempt to describe.
Hmm. Well, and you have to, when we're done, you have to give me the reference to that mitochondrial electric field
We
work.
will.
Yeah. Well, here's several questions or thoughts in your question. Um, so one thing that occurred to me is, as you were talking, that I think one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have is that like that the air here is a gas and this is a liquid, and okay, that's cool. But then not seeing the problem is we don't, I think, sufficiently ponder that the gas world actually interpenetrates the liquid world. So there, we in physics we say that the gas is dissolved, as if that explains anything, right? So it's dissolved. There's gas dissolved into the water, and I think that gives a wrong picture. It's that the world of air is much finer, faster, penetrating than the world of a liquid, and the world of air literally penetrates through the water. But I would rather say it penetrates through the world of the water rather than it's dissolved in there. And we can take the same thing with plasma then. So it's not that, the plasma exists in the light bulb only, right? It's that the world of plasma penetrates everything, penetrates all gases, penetrates all solids, penetrates all liquids. So these worlds, they live in each other, and it penetrated in each other. So that's one thought I had when you were talking, to clarify that. But then when you were saying like about the microtubules, so thinking like that, that it's a like a little plasma tube, something like that.
I do. And I have nothing to go off of that other than just my own thought experiments. But yes, I do. Because when you start looking at like Birkeland currents and how they function and how they move, and when you look at a little Tesla ball, where you've got the sparks all over the plasmas going, and then you touch it and it's directed. And when you look at magnetism and how that controls plasma's trajectory, we know the heart has a magnetic field. We know the ATP ACE creates a magnetic field. We know that oxygen's paramagnetic. Like, we know that we have this magnetic aspect going on. So it just makes sense to me that we have some sort of a plasma component, and that's just the pieces that make sense in my.
Yeah, well, I would completely agree with that. And it's an example where you're not going to really understand that if you're stuck in a biochemistry paradigm, right? You have to develop a bioplasma paradigm or biomagnetic paradigm. Yeah.
You called the microtubules an optical network, which I thought was a really interesting observation. And of course, there were many other properties that you attributed to microtubules, such as, it's a highway for biochemicals to be transported. It's a structural component of cells. But the light piece I was very drawn to. Will you talk about how you see that as an optical network?
Yeah. It's nowhere near any kind of experimental understanding. But I think part of it is looking for, uh, biologists are pretty good at this idea that there's the engine, and then there's what controls the engine. So the engine is this huge thing in your car, right? Gigantic thing with all kinds of heat and momentum and stuff, but you control it with this tiny little thing with your foot, right? That's the little control that controls this entire thing. So biologists, I think, are generally pretty good with that idea, and that seems to be one of these patterns that scales from the small all the way up the universe. And so when I was pondering the microtubules, uh, yes, they can be used to transport matter, like highways. That's very cool. But then it also, when I was just pondering this idea of control, you need a control network. Then that seemed to fit. It seemed to fit. Again, no experiments I have to pry it, but you can send signals. You can send signals along little wires. That's just, we know that. We know you can do that. Uh, yeah, and yeah, it's a bit of a jump, but the same thing. What's lacking then is that for planetary and solar physics, we need to take that. We need to see that same principle that, what controls the Earth's climate? Well, it's not really, the amount of sunlight hitting the Earth. That's just this big something, this big matter energy thing. But there's got to be these other smaller levers that control how all of that input energy gets utilized on the Earth to control the climate. There's so little we know about cells. I mean, we know that there's all these signaling molecules. We know there's all the molecules that, like on the cell wall, what do they call them? The ones that are sitting there listening, right, to what's going on. Anyway, they got a name. And so we know that things are controlled through pathways like that. But I think we need to really, how do I put it? Just because we know that if you block a certain cell receptor, then you can stop the cell from doing something. I don't know. You can stop it from doing something just by blocking a receptor. But we don't. But there's like 7 steps or 14 steps or 21 steps between those two that we just don't really understand. And as long as we try to make them all chemistry, I think we're never going to understand. And so I think a lot of people, of course, think that there have to be controls, signals and controls going on inside the cell and between the cell that are electrical and not chemical. And so certainly the microtubules seemed like a perfect opportunity for that. But even that is a little suspect because I'm still relying on a very kind of solid sense-based notion that, a wire, I see a wire, that must be a wire. But who knows what the cell is actually using?
Well, maybe it's the air. Maybe it's the penetration of air that's so small, which is that other form of plasma that we're kind of alluding to, right? That may be that piece. I mean, that's the interesting part about Barry Ninam's work and his, conclusion that the last 300-400 years we've completely omitted the role of what he calls dissolved gas. I actually kind of like it, the penetrating aspects of gas, that it's so teeny. And I think that's why we're talking about nanobubbles too, and that they actually seem to be fueling many of our reactions. In fact, enzymatic reactions are fueled, but they are fueled by this. So that's a whole other aspect of how our bodies work. So it's very fascinating to kind of talk about this and see how we can combine all these ideas, even though we don't have necessarily any kind of demonstrations to back this up. But yeah. I want to turn it to another one of your columns that I read and that you had sent us, and it's Biochemistry and the Soul. And I really loved that column. It's so deep and so rich. And I was particularly drawn to the image of the cosmology, the 27 layers, levels, you called them. And you talked about non-human agency. And you also introduced a new term, principalities. And I'm curious if you can talk about that a little bit. I know it's deep, but it's so interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, that whole line of thought was, I think it was obvious, kind of stimulated by what the events were going on in 2020.
Sure.
And, a lot of us, I think, had a very, very deep response to it all, that went way beyond just whatever was being talked about, and so that really started me thinking, like, okay, I really do. My experience is, so we were talking about life before. So what is life? How is it different from chemistry? There are two. I can have a bunch of chemicals which are alive, or in which life is passing through, or something like that. But as soon as the body dies, whatever that means, as soon as the body dies, the chemicals are still there, right? Everybody knows this. We all know. You can look at, that's a dead squirrel, that's a live squirrel. It's very obvious to us, and yet our science seems somehow baffled, seems somehow not to actually be able to say what's the difference between a dead squirrel and a live squirrel, right? So life, but then, okay, so that life being a something that inhabits us or passes through us or animates us, or what, I'm not even sure the right verb. But then beyond that, what is a soul? This, of course, has been discussed forever, and I'm not. But part of what I was pondering is whatever the soul is, it also is attached to this body, or connected, or they communicate. There's some connection between the soul and the body, the physical body, and just pondering on the outrageous complexity of the cellular body, just be complex beyond any of our abilities to understand. That complexity, the thought I had was that complexity is required in order for this communication or interpenetration between the soul and the body. You need something literally this complicated in order to achieve that interpenetration, and not only just complicated in the sense of like, say, the chemistry or whatever, but like you need a something that has thoughts. You need a something that has feelings. You need a something that has physical perceptions. It's all required. Everything you know about yourself, the attributes of your physical body, it's all required in order for this proper penetration to happen. And then the thought of going in and mucking with, say, the DNA. Oh, let's muck with the DNA. Let's just change the DNA. Maybe we'll make healthier people, or whatever the thought is, right? At the time, it was just like, oh my God, we have no idea what we're doing. I mean, only somebody who did not believe or didn't experience, for me, it's not really so much belief anymore, it's more experience. Only someone who never experienced their soul or their spirit would even think of doing something like that. It wouldn't even occur to me to mess up my genes. I mean, I can't even tell you how that would never occur to me, to mess up my genes, or to do it in this scattershot kind of way, like, hey, let's try this, let's try this, let's try that. And so the scary thought, which kind of prompted the writing of that essay, was that we, through our own mucking around with things, we could actually break the connection between the soul and the body. And then what? Then what do we have then? I don't know if the body will die if you do that. Probably not. There's plenty of soulless people around, right? So probably the body would keep living and the thoughts would keep happening, but we would lose that connection with whatever that higher part is, and that's a terrifying thought. That kind of, to me, kind of evokes resonances with some cultures have stories of how there's been several versions of humanity, like the Aztecs, wherever their mythology comes from. They inherited it, but like we're the fourth version. We're the fourth version of humanity because things keep going wrong. Things go wrong. One of the things went wrong. I remember this vividly. Was we became ungrateful. And that was enough for the gods to say, okay, we got to start over. This is not going in. And so the gods just, just wipe it out, start over, right? And so the thought that we would break that connection through this bizarre thought that we could do it chemically. Wow, we could actually break the connection by mucking with some part. If that connection gets broken, then, I mean, I don't know, start over, right? Start over. We've lost the connection. Because it comes down to why do we think we're here? It always comes down to that. Why do we think we're here? Are we here to run around in these cellular bodies? Maybe that's part of it, but I think it's much more. There's much more than that.
On that thought, with it, if DNA is an antenna, right, and you have said in one of your presentations that anything that receives emits, right?
Yeah.
I think that's fascinating. So can you tie that into what you just laid out, and maybe even the work of Luc Montagnier?
Oof. Well, now that you're asking, so in what I just talked through, maybe the receiving, at least in my mind, the receiving side was clear that the DNA is receiving something from, well, we don't even, it could be, we could say the soul, but it also could be from anything. It could be receiving information from the earth, receiving from the sun. Um, uh, I ran across that phrase again from the Gospel of John, that whatever the logos is, the Christ, the logos, the second piece of the Trinity, the logos, is in that logos is life, and that life is the light of men. And it just resonated with me with something like we think that the sun shines and that's what light is, and we build instruments to the cameras and whatnot, and it just sometimes makes me think that there's other stuff going on, that if whatever this logos is, this Christ principle, whatever it is, if it wasn't here right now in the room penetrating all of us, we wouldn't even see. We wouldn't even have light. We I don't know what we would have. We wouldn't have this, right? Uh, and so just thinking about that, the earth is talking to the DNA, the sun is talking to the DNA. Um, it, it, yeah, I mean, if life is a solar idea, then how does that idea get communicated? Right, the form of our bodies could be communicated via light, whatever light is. We understand very little about what light really is. So then the you asked about emitting as well, and I guess that kind of that paints out the picture that the 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 energy, the forces, the love is going both ways, up and down the chain of being. So we're receiving all this information, influence, love from above, which our DNA is going, woo, it's just, rocking and rolling and absorbing it all. But then we at least have the chance of propagating that back up. We can send it back up. And a lot of us think, well, a lot of us have the experience of sending something back up, say emotionally, say emotions of gratitude or wonder or something, and there's that sense that it's going up. But we don't yet understand how an emotion manifests at all. I mean, there's got to be a chemical aspect to it. There's got to be an electrical aspect to it. It has some physical reality. And so when I send that gratitude back up, that it has to have a physical aspect to it. And I don't know whether it's the DNA that's emitting that. I tend to think, I don't know. What do I know? I don't think so. I think whatever our heart is, which we don't understand what the heart is, I think it's whatever that antenna is the one that's propagating emotions like that, like gratitude and wonder. And then it then you can see why the Aztecs would say that one version of humanity was wiped out because we became ungrateful. That is a necessary something that needs to be going back up. Gratitude needs to be going back up. If the gratitude stops going back up, then something is wrong with the setup. Something's wrong with the machinery. Something's wrong with the arrangement, and it needs to be. You need to start over. Got to start over.
You prompted another thought I had. Mitochondria have their own set of DNA too. And so we know that we have this loop between mitochondria and chromatin, right? Histones and DNA, that they absorb light and emit light, right? Van Wyck has laid this out beautifully with the sporadic display within cancer cells, or the coherent and delayed luminescence within a healthy cell. And so you've got
Wow.
this feedback loop going between mitochondria and DNA. And it appears that the light is stored in those H's, right? The crosses of the ladder, so to speak. What are your thoughts around that?
Oof, I don't know. I would rather you tell me. You seem to know a lot about mitochondria that I would like to know. So I think you should tell me.
For it.
Well, another. I think the light piece is just so important. I think that this is how we're going to solve the cancer problem. It all goes down to the light, and I think that you also, by the way, thank you for laying out the logos within the gospel, because that's why I named it Logos Plasma. And again, this is just a thought process in my head. Um, you also relayed the, light within blood. And I think this ties into everything we're talking about. I think this is part of how you transfer. I think hemoglobin actually transfers, but I think there's other things, light inside the body. That way we can then charge the cells, the mitochondria,
Um,
the DNA for this loop. And so
well,
we know that green is very important. We know that green changes the charge state of iron. We know that hemoglobin is a heme protein. We know the mitochondria have heme proteins, right? And we all have this emission and absorption spectrums within each one of those. So specifically, the green, I think, is incredibly important. I don't want to be myopic in only highlighting green and pretend like other things don't matter. But I think that, I think it's a 532 is kind of that peak spectrum that we need in there. Tie into the green and within the environment and within the body, because you've done it in multiple talks, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm trying to piece together some of this, what I think I know about the mitochondria.
so what have you found that the green wavelength is particularly important for mitochondria or for all kinds of functions?
Oh, I think it completely changes the charge state of hemoglobin, right? So like with COVID, we hit on that. When you have met hemoglobin versus properly functioning hemoglobin, you're not able to release the oxygen, right? This goes back to the whole paramagnetic aspect that oxygen is. So within COVID, what happened with anybody that was put on a ventilator? It was a disaster. It wasn't a saturation issue, it was the transfer issue, right? We were not able to transport the oxygen to where it's released because of the charge state. So what it seemed to be is the treatment was actually sunlight, specifically green and methylene blue. That would have saved people's lives, most likely, based on my understanding.
Yeah,
So the green has a massive impact. And when you look at the world, we're surrounded by green, right?
yeah,
In a healthy environment, a healthy ecosystem, I think the color matters. The color matters on many different scales, but this is why we're seeing some work on green lasers being very effective for healing modalities, where we're seeing that a walk in the forest, Japanese forest bathing is extremely healing. We see that it changes the charge state of iron, like on and on and on and on. And so I'm just trying to understand what you think on that green topic.
You
wow,
talked about that in relation to seeds. That was very
yeah,
interesting in that particular lecture you did, where a seed, if it's dormant, doesn't give off anything, but when you put it in the ground, the first light it gives off is green light.
yeah.
I thought was significant as well. I don't know,
Yeah,
somehow that had to be connected.
I know, and I don't know whether or not I really don't know whether or not the green matters. It could it be blue? Do other seed species put out red? I don't know. A lot of
True.
questions there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it certainly it seems to relate to this idea of signaling or controlling. How do
Hmm.
you switch on something? Well, you just need to know what the switch is, or you have to have a switch. The green chlorophyll is very similar to hemoglobin, I think,
It is.
if I remember correctly, structurally at least. Yeah,
It has magnesium at its center instead of iron, but that's the difference.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, we know that we are aware of the chemical symbiosis between animals and plants, right? That the plants emit the oxygen, we breathe it in, we send out the carbon dioxide. So we're aware of that chemical cycle. I'm looking at the trees outside my window. That chemical, absolute, how we're tied together absolutely chemically in the world of gas and molecules. So yeah, so is it what is that? What's that green light? Why is that necessary? It's not an accident, right? Just like it's not an accident that the plants emit oxygen and we breathe in oxygen. Um, boy, I don't know. Nothing's really. Yeah, I don't know if I have much to contribute on the green question. It's a great question.
We'll come back
Um,
to it. We're
yeah.
going to let you ponder that one.
Okay.
And we'll come back to it at some point. We'll repeat this. What I do love for you to talk about, if you can, is about the heart and the fields that our hearts emit and the role of that. You just mentioned gratitude, and that is, yeah, I never even thought about that. That just seems so beautiful that we are emitting that, and that of course we require that. I wasn't aware that one form of humanity was um ended because we had a lack of it.
I know, isn't that wild? That is wild.
So but the heart, it may just, it's that biofield, the human biofield that we emit, and it can be affected by all sorts of outside radiation, I'm sure, and also emotion, as you just alluded to. And so I'm curious, because we are now finding ourselves in a world that's saturated with electromagnetic frequencies from all ends. How is that
Yeah,
affecting this
yeah,
field that we have and our heart function?
I know. I can't imagine that's doing it any good. It's really hard to imagine um, that it's beneficial to us, all the fields we're creating. Do you sounds like you looked a bit, if I remember correctly, at the heart math work, which is incredible, right? And that the they show that the torus, right, that the torus field around, um, and it's looking to me now like every well, how I would put it, every living being has that torus as a field, has a field that is that torus shape. So we certainly have it around us. But if you look at the magnetic field of a planet, it has that same torus shape to it, right? And just in the last 10 years, maybe we can piece out that galaxies also have that torus. Um, uh, and I bet someone has shown it for cells, but I haven't found that research. Does a cell have a pole? Does a cell have an axis? And does it have a torus that is around that axis? Um, and then each one of those that's like the overall shape. That's the overall shape. But then if you zoom in a bit, if you increase your resolution, then there's all kinds of smaller threads that are going everywhere. Smaller threads, and each one of those breaks up into smaller threads and smaller threads. Um, I don't know that there's probably a limit to how small the threads get, but whatever, it's very. My guess is that those threads go down to become so small that they affect individual cells, um, so that your emotional state can affect individual cells through this field. And of course, that's been known forever, that your emotional state affects your health. But in terms of the physics of it, there has to be some material manifestation of it, because we live in a material universe as well. So, how do you materially connect them? Uh, yeah. So the whatever is coming out of this organ, I do think it is connected down to individual cells. That's how connected it is, and somehow we're okay with the idea that there's capillaries that go to every single cell. That is a miracle. That is like, what? Every cell, yeah, every single cell is touched by what? How is that even possible? Right? That seems impossible. So the same will be true of the fields. The in this case, the field around the heart. The overall effects, but it has to also go down to individual cellular level. Otherwise, the cell would be disconnected. The cell would not know it's part of a body. Uh, it would be awful, right? It would be alone. It wouldn't know it's part of a body if it didn't have that connection to the heart.
That happens when it loses charge too, the cell, right? It can no longer
Yeah, so
communicate.
the charge thing, I know, cycling back to Levin's lab, Becker's work,
Will you
Yeah.
talk?
So where is that? where is that? Where is that form, that pattern? How is that being generated? You cut off the poor salamander's toe, and then you can see there's still a toe there in the electric fields. How is that generated? Where's that coming from? Boy, talk about a mystery there. Where is that shape coming from? How does that shape persist?
One thing
Uh,
about Levin's lab that I find absolutely just mind blowing is that within, I don't remember if it was C. elegans or what, but they changed the electromagnetic input and a new species came out of it. Right? Like that, the DNA didn't change, the environment did.
right, 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 and not any old environment, the electrical environment, right? And then you can get different species, what we would call a different species of a worm, right? According to our taxonomy, we would call it a different species of worm. But it kind of hints back towards the what we were saying earlier about time and dimensions of time. That there is a world of possibilities, and in whatever, if we want to make the connection with the DNA of the poor little worm, that DNA has within it many possible worms. you know, uh, there's many possible what we would call species of worm that are in that DNA, and one of them is being expressed, and that's a great mystery, right? How does just one of them get expressed, and then why would an electric field change that? But change which one is whew, it's wild. I don't know. Yeah, I mean beyond. So for the work you've done looking at cancer cells, just say some of the things, just some of the like, do they lose their voltage gap between inner and outer? What are some of the attributes that you've found with the electricity of a cancer cell versus a healthy one?
Let me hit some high points and then Petra, you take over. We know that we have a healthy cell voltage of around negative 200, right? And then as we get away from that, more towards positive, we lose health. We know that through Van Wyck, kind of a combination of Maywin Ho, Fritz Pop, and Roland Van Wyck's work, that in a cancer cell we do not hold light emissions as long as a healthy cell. That so with and it's chaotic, there is not a coherence within this signal. And right, I think this goes back to that whole loop between the mitochondria and chromatin. We know that we see that Warburg shift in there as well, where oxygen actually becomes a toxin within the process. It reverts back to fermentation. So these are some of the characteristics. You have your hallmarks of cancer, whatever. But like this is where I think that Petra and I try to look at this through that different lens. Is why are those aspects so important? And when you throw in, this is one of the things I get censored for all the time, but when we throw in something such as like SV40, and that is going to darken a certain part of DNA, right? Whether that is mTOR, AMPK, like whatever the mechanisms, it is going to be darkened and not be expressed through light, right? This epigenetic expression is through light. It's not the DNA, right? I think you did a great analogy with the recipe. The ingredients don't make the final product, right? It's this whole process, and I think light is what is that process. So those stark contrasts, in my opinion, matter a lot more than some of the other stuff that we have seen. Petra.
Yeah, you laid it out beautifully. I think the ability of the DNA to hold on to the light and release it in a pulsative fashion, and it becomes a dialogue really between mitochondria and the DNA, and that needs to continually take place within a cell for all of its functions to be completed. And when that light it gets turns chaotic and it starts leaking out and at a much higher rate, and that's also what they can measure, and that's from Fritz Pop's work, that cells that are dysfunctioning in cancer cells, they give off way more light, they're losing the light, they're no longer able to hold on to it so that it can actually perform all of the activities that it normally
Wow. And that also goes along with the change in the voltage, you're
Yeah.
saying, of the cell also.
Well, but that also has to do with the ability of our mitochondria to produce metabolic water. And we do that much more efficiently if we uh, fuel our cells with more fats rather than carbs. We do it at twice uh, the amount. And so with every molecule of water, we also generate electrons, and the electrons maintain the net negative charge of the cell. And so if we eat a diet of largely carbohydrates and don't pay any attention to our ability to produce water, and in fact, this is absolutely foundational and fundamental for our bodies to be able to do that at a very efficient rate, yeah, then it all just goes haywire. It's another aspect of it.
Yeah.
And
That's
the
what we
CCO
discussed. I'm
is
sure there's
dependent
many
on
more
red light.
aspects.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Boy.
So like
It
looking at
kind of,
any of this outside of the water context is is overly myopic as well, right? Like you cannot take the cell out of that water environment and understand it. Like it just doesn't work. And not only that, we have another leg of the stool, so to speak, in melanin. Like none of this entire system works when we remove melanin from the picture. That's why a huge part of why like the blue lights are so toxic and hiding from the sun and not building more melanin, like none of it works without all of it. And this is
yeah.
why I think that's why these type of conversations are so important, because that rhyming throughout the scales from the greatest to the smallest.
Yeah. I'm just envisioning the difference between the healthy cell with its light communicating to the pieces, and then we can break it. We can throw a wrench into the works and then cause mayhem. It's very fascinating, the idea of the light leaking out. Yeah. How do you know it's just not producing more? Did pop have some kind of way of measuring the light in and out of the cell or something?
The
Yeah.
photo
I
multiplier
don't
with Van Wyck has really taken the torch, and I think he's working on a new project. Pretty excited about. I think we need to send you the interview that he did with Cameron Borg. To my knowledge, it's the only one only podcast he's ever done. Absolutely beautiful, fascinating. But the I think you hit on, there's so many ways to mess up the system, right? If we
Yeah.
dehydrate the cell, we don't have melanin, we don't have the appropriate nanobubble structures within there. We have excessive deuterium, right? Like on and on and on. There's ways of disrupting it.
Right. Right.
lack of gratitude. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
that messes it up.
Wow.
Yeah.
So interesting. What else, Logan, did you want to ask Dr. Clarich about today?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It's good. Good conversation. Yeah. If you want to, if yeah, you could send me what you just said. Then also the work with measuring the voltage of the mitochondria, and then that might spark a more specific conversation, because I know today we've been talking a little general, just because I don't have the detail information knowledge that it would take to go further. Well, You'll have to write all these down for me because they don't lodge in there when you say the words.
We no problem.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. So an hour is a good for a first talk.